Pompeii was not waiting beneath a familiar smoking cone. Vesuvius had been quiet for centuries, its slopes looked fertile, and the city was still repairing damage from the earthquake of 62 CE. The exact calendar date of the eruption is debated, but the physical sequence is stronger than the calendar. Falling pumice came first, then roof failures, darkness, and lethal pyroclastic currents. Shops, workshops, baths, and homes formed a living commercial city. Tremors were known in Campania and did not automatically signal an imminent Plinian eruption to Roman residents. Archaeology preserves repairs, stored goods, and unfinished work, but it cannot tell us the private plans of each inhabitant. The reconstruction therefore begins with documented urban conditions, not invented final conversations. INGV reconstructs an opening phase in which rising magma interacted with shallow groundwater, followed by a sustained eruption column. The column climbed roughly 25 kilometers. From a distance, Pliny the Younger later compared its shape to a pine tree, a trunk rising before spreading into branches. The famous description identifies the form, not an exact modern timestamp for every town. The eruption column carried gas, ash, and pumice upward. Wind pushed the main fall toward the southeast over Pompeii. Light-colored pumice began striking roofs and streets. At first, the fragments could look less immediately lethal than flowing lava, but their accumulation created a growing structural load while walking became slower with every layer underfoot. Across the bay at Misenum, Pliny the Younger observed the cloud. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, commanded the Roman fleet. The elder Pliny prepared to investigate and then turned the voyage into a rescue effort after receiving a plea for help. His later route and death at Stabii connect the eyewitness letters to the volcanic deposits, but the letters were written years afterward and must be handled as testimony, not telemetry. Residents faced a decision with incomplete information: shelter beneath masonry or cross open streets under falling stone. Leaving early could work, waiting could protect against the first impacts but increase the risk of blocked doors and collapsing roofs. The evidence shows both flight and shelter. It does not support a single behavior for an entire city. Pumice piled across tiles and flat surfaces. Roof capacity varied with construction, span, maintenance, and where material accumulated. The archaeological park reports that some people were trapped or killed when roofs and walls failed beneath roughly meters of volcanic debris. The first phase was therefore already deadly before the later hot currents reached Pompeii. INGV divides the deposit into eruptive units. A pale pumice fall was followed by darker gray material as the eruption tapped different magma. Partial column collapses began producing currents nearer the volcano. The changing deposit was not a clean clock visible to residents, but it records a system becoming less stable as the night advanced. Herculaneum lay west of Vesuvius and received less of the main pumice fall, yet its apparent advantage ended when pyroclastic surges reached the coast. Hot mixtures of gas, ash, and fragments moved along the ground. Shelters that protected against falling stone could not guarantee protection against the later currents. Ash and the towering column reduced daylight. Oil lamps could illuminate rooms but not restore visibility across a city being buried. Earthquakes accompanied the eruption. Doors jammed, familiar thresholds disappeared beneath pumice, and every return trip became harder. The popular image of Pompeii freezing in a single instant erases these many hours of changing hazards. Pliny the Elder reached Stabii, but adverse wind and sea conditions complicated departure. His party sheltered while ash and pumice continued to fall. Pliny later died there. The precise medical cause cannot be proven from the letter. The secure point is that a commander who crossed the bay to help others became trapped inside the same regional emergency. By midnight, the weight above rooms had increased for hours. Beams and tiles failed in places, filling interiors and blocking exits. Other structures remained standing. Archaeology therefore shows uneven survival spaces rather than one universal collapse time. Each additional hour spent inside traded protection from falling pumice for greater structural and entrapment risk. A Plinian column stays aloft while its upward momentum and buoyancy overcome gravity. When the dense mixture can no longer remain supported, parts collapse and drive ground-hugging currents outward. Deposit layers around Vesuvius record repeated pulses, not one continuous wall. Pompeii's last phase arrived through that sequence of collapses. Dilute currents and ash pulses moved across the landscape as the column destabilized. Some did not carry the same reach or intensity as the later destructive phase. For residents, however, the sequence offered no reliable countdown. Visibility, breathable air, and escape routes were deteriorating while the volcano changed behavior beyond sight. The Pompeii Archaeological Park places the violent hot ash and gas phase around the following morning. A pyroclastic density current penetrated streets, rooms, and spaces not already filled by fall deposits. The official account emphasizes that defense became useless. This was not a river of lava. It was a fast, ground-hugging mixture of hot particles and gas. An INGV study modeled the current affecting Pompeii at roughly 15 minutes in duration. That number describes the destructive current environment, not the whole eruption. Heat, ash concentration, and inhalation made survival impossible for people still exposed. Different studies emphasize thermal shock and asphyxiation mechanisms. The film avoids pretending every victim died identically. Further, eruptive units spread radially and buried the Vesuvian settlements. Ash entered buildings, filled streets, and covered the pumice layer. The landscape that emerged was not a neat, preserved museum. Roofs had collapsed, objects shifted, fires and later disturbance occurred, and survivors returned where possible to recover property. More than 1,000 victims have been found at Pompeii. Organic material decomposed inside hardened ash, leaving cavities that 19th-century excavators later filled with plaster. The casts preserve positions and clothing folds with extraordinary force, but they are archaeological products made centuries later, not bodies instantly turned to stone. The last day can be reconstructed responsibly only by separating confidence levels. The eruption date may have been in August or October. Individual choices are largely unknown. Deposit units and broad phases are well supported. Pompeii's destruction was a cascade. Hours of pumice consumed escape and structural margins before unstable eruption columns generated the lethal currents that ended the city. The responsible conclusion is not that every resident faced the same instant, but that changing hazards narrowed different escape routes at different times. The deposits preserve that sequence even when individual minutes cannot be assigned.